Hello, Molweni Sanu Hujambo. I'm Tembekile Mkhototo, and this is Unwrap Africa, where every Sunday night we focus on the latest news, trends, and successes of the African continent. Siyaqaqa. Coming up on the program tonight, SADC's Foreign Affairs Ministerial meeting is going to take place in Durban this coming week. We'll look ahead to that, while in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Ebola virus continues to spread rapidly, with women and children we're hearing worst affected. We'll get an update on just what's going on in the DRC from the W.H.O's incident manager, Dr. Patrick Otim. And who can forget that in South Africa today, we are marking a historic day, exactly 70 years since women in this country, women of color, predominantly black women, colored women, and some white women, all marched to the union buildings against the oppressive pass laws in 1956. And today, the country pauses for a moment to reflect on their sacrifice and indeed to wish you, the women of South Africa, a wonderful Women's Day. And we hope that the sacrifices of that period have made life, to some extent, a lot easier for you today. Let's have a look at our question of the day then. So we want to know tonight, what should the SADC leaders who are going to be meeting in Durban do about the migration problem? We'll take your thoughts on Facebook, where we are SABC Unwrap Africa, and on X, where our handle is SABC News_TV. We'll look at your reflections later on Unwrap Africa. For now, though, let's have a look at the main news stories from the continent this week. And we begin in Nigeria, where security forces have rescued more than 300 people who were abducted in separate attacks in northern Niger or Niger State, as well as Kwara. All the victims were freed from the Kainji Lake National Park forest in Niger State.
There's a deliberate strategy towards persecuting political opponents. And then it's become quite obvious that we are brewing a system of selective justice.
Supporters of Ghana's main opposition, New Patriotic Party, have marched through the capital, Accra. They've accused the government of undermining democracy in the country. The demonstrations come after the government in Ghana unveiled proposed constitutional reforms that include extending the presidential term limit from 4 to 5 years, as well as lowering the minimum age for presidential candidates from 40 to 35. In Kenya, women have marched through the streets of Nairobi demanding the release of relatives they say were abducted, and their whereabouts, they say, remain unknown. And in the DRC, health authorities have now screened more than 300 passengers who were traveling on a riverboat near Kinshasa. It comes after the death of a man who's suspected of having been sick with Ebola. That raised concern then, because the virus continues to claim lives in the DRC, where more than 1,800 people are now known to have died from more than 4,000 confirmed cases. NGOs that are distributing food to migrants from Morocco in Spain's Ceuta say that they are fast running out of resources, 1 week after a border rush killed dozens making the crossing. A cemetery in Ceuta is meanwhile being readied to receive the bodies of up to 80 migrants who died. Nigerian artist Emmanuel Olatunde is giving portraiture an earthy new dimension. The 39-year-old artist uses clay to create his paintings. His work basically blends traditional materials of contemporary art and offers a distinctive perspective on identity, place, and the natural world. I was telling you about this at the beginning of the program, that SADC Foreign Affairs Ministerial meeting that's going to get underway in South Africa's port city, Durban, this coming week. It will finalize the agenda for the SADC Heads of State and Government Summit. South Africa's International Relations Minister, Ronald Lamola, says it's an important summit as it comes at a time marked by many challenges.
There will be no development without peace and security. So it is part of the high-level agenda of the SADC, which the MCO has dealt with, and the organ troika will obviously sit also on the eve of the summit. The critical issues are two. On peace and security, is the Eastern DRC, and it's also the process to support the democratic process in Madagascar. which have now been led by a high-level panel led by the former president of Malawi, Mayor Joyce Banda. That is also a matter that has got clear monitoring mechanisms from us to take Madagascar to their democratic elections within the 24 months that has been agreed upon. With regards to the Eastern DRC, it remains a challenge that we have to be kept seized on. As you will remember, there was a summit of the East Africa Community and SADC on the Eastern DRC. The MCO in Malawi has resolved that we need another one to now get the feedback from the panel that we have appointed through the African Union. How far have they gone to broker peace in the Eastern DRC, and what is the feedback that we can now take through our structures?
Are you going to discuss the issue of migration?
Yes, it is on the agenda. As you know, Ma'am Sophie, it was an issue that was raised at the African Union level by Ghana to discuss justice xenophobia in South Africa. But we were very clear that any discussion should be comprehensive, deal with the push and pull factors, deal with the issues of climate change, job creation, democracy, peace and stability, and so forth across the continent. But the key thing was that we succeeded to persuade the AU not to put this matter on the agenda because we had the support of the SADC countries, who are the biggest, who are the most affected by this. When Zimbabwe comes in and say, we are the most affected by this matter in line with the principle of subsidiarity and complementarity of the AU should be allowed to be discussed by the RECs, the regional development structures, which is the SADC platform. It helped to persuade the AU that indeed this matter should be discussed at a comprehensive level, which is agreed, but also allow those structures to discuss this matter. And it is therefore a matter that will be on the agenda because, as you are aware, there is a draft protocol of SADC on the free movement of people on goods.
But countries don't sign up.
Yes, that is the issue that we'll have to discuss. We have signed. It's 7 countries that have signed. Malawi has now, during the MCO, they have announced that they will now sign the protocol. We need another about 8 countries to sign because that protocol is very clear that movement of people and goods must be regular, must be orderly, it must be anchored on the rule of law. So that will be very important that it is implemented because it is anchored on the rule of law. It's not a free for all and it's not a disorderly and irregular migration.
That's South Africa's International Relations Minister, Ronald Lamola, in conversation with Unwrap Africa's Sophie Mokoena, confirming that when his foreign affairs counterparts meet in Durban for a SADC gathering this coming week, that they will talk about the issue of migration. And our question tonight is, what do you think SADC leaders should in fact do about migration on the continent? Let's look at some of the responses that have come in so far. We'll start with one here that says that SADC should free people to move with a card because they have technology that can scan, a digital card, I think this is, and basically that they've got technology that can scan and recognize the biometric system which we use now. People are going to South Africa because South Africa's currency is good and its circulation is fast because of too many people working on almost all sectors. So people are attracted to that. The last bit of this message saying that how come driver's licenses for SADC are digital, but this is not. The banning then of some of the travel documents that should be digitized is one of the issues that is coming through from this tweet or a post from X at least, as far as your responses. An account here that calls itself Malawi Africa Youth Organization says that SADC leaders should work together to create more jobs, improve security and strengthen economies across the region. At the same time, migration should be managed through fair immigration laws, proper documentation and respect for the laws and people of every member country. Cooperation is better than division. Shalom Hassan says that countries should ensure their citizens have proper travel documents to enforce the laws and 3, accelerate regional economic development. Andrea Makarakiza says that SADC has to work like Schengen zone in Europe while citizens are free to work together, not to isolate one country. The things are simple, but Africans, we've been taken as simple things due to colonialism. So those are the responses at the moment, and a reminder as always that the views expressed are not necessarily a reflection of the editorial position of SABC News, but we welcome your various perspectives on the issues of the day, and we'll look at more of what you have to say on the SADC leaders meeting and the issue of migration before we wrap up tonight's edition of Unwrap Africa. When we come back, we'll look at the frightening situation around the Ebola outbreak in the DRC. The Democratic Republic of Congo is now facing the largest Ebola outbreak in its history, with the World Health Organization warning that the virus is spreading faster than the response on the ground. More than 3,600 people have been infected since the outbreak began in May, and nearly 1,600 have died. For context, there are tallies that put the number of infections at more than 4,000 and the number of Ebola deaths in the DRC since May at more than 1,800. There were alarming warnings this week that we could possibly go into a situation where there is a mutation of the current strain.
The outbreak has now overtaken the country's devastating 2018 to 2020 epidemic, making it the second largest Ebola outbreak ever recorded worldwide, after West Africa's outbreak in 2014 to 2016. As the UN reports clashes in the South Kivu territories of Uvira, Fizi and Mwenga.
Access to healthcare has been particularly impacted, with damage to health facilities and the departure of medical personnel limiting the availability of medical care in affected areas. These developments come as efforts to contain the Ebola outbreak continue in the province. We reiterate our calls on all parties to protect civilians, facilitate safe and sustained humanitarian access, and restore telecommunications, which remain critical for civilian protection, public health efforts, and humanitarian operations.
The crisis is centered in eastern Congo, where conflict, mass displacement and overcrowded camps are making it much harder to stop the spread of Ebola. This week, UN partner, the International Medical Corps, is opening the country's largest Ebola treatment center, adding 100 beds to the response. But the World Health Organization says far more resources are needed to get ahead of the outbreak, warning that insecurity and population movements continue to give the virus new opportunities to spread. Officials briefed the media from Bunia last week.
In support of the government, I'm calling that we step up, across the response, be it the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, member states. We need to massively step up our response, be it in terms of supplies, specialized supplies like personal protective equipment, staff, specialized medical staff, and logisticians. And we call upon member states to keep the borders open so that our staff can travel in to Congo to respond, so that we can bring in supplies quickly and freely, and then when colleagues come out, that they're able to return home.
A deadly epidemic exacerbating a long-standing and dire humanitarian situation in the country's eastern regions.
My number one message is that this situation requires much, much more attention. And so I welcome this opportunity to speak to all of you. This is the fastest growing Ebola crisis ever, Ebola outbreak ever. To make a comparison, in the past 2 months, 1,000 people have died. That took 8 months for 1,000 people to die in West Africa. So that means that there is a fourfold in terms of the number of deaths in this short period of time. And I think that itself requires world attention.
Scow tried to convey the complexities of the situation.
You may think that it's just about treating the identified patients, but no, this requires, from all the experience we have, a broader set of tools, and that includes food. We cannot isolate patients unless we provide them also food. We cannot have health workers working around the clock in these dangerous environments unless they're also being fed. And frankly, we also have whole communities who have been closed off and that we expect to remain in their homes, and they also need to be fed.
Some 10 million people are acutely food insecure in eastern DRC, and to sustain all operations in the country for the next 6 months, WFP requires over $293 million, which includes funding for emergency logistics and food assistance in Ituri and other affected areas. Shervin Brycebees, SABC News, New York.
Well, for more on the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're joined this evening by the World Health Organization's Incident Manager, Dr. Patrick Otim. A very good evening to you, Doctor. Grateful for your time on Unwrap Africa. So, as I was saying just before Sherwin's report, that one of the alarming bits of reporting this past week has been about a possible mutation of the Ebola strain that's currently circulating in the DRC. Is it mutating?
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to the viewers. The Ebola Bundibujo species that we are dealing with in the DRC, we've been monitoring it quite closely. The epidemiologists, the virologists, and all the clinicians have been looking at different parameters of how the virus is presenting, so the transmission dynamics, the signs and symptoms that patients are presenting with, as well as reviewing the genomic surveillance data. And so far, we have had over 400 sequence data uploaded by the DRC on the public platforms. So far, we have not yet seen any evidence of mutation. However, when you have a very intense transmission happening of a virus like this with sustained person-to-person spread, the risk of a mutation is high, and that is the concern that is being raised, so that we can really ramp up intervention, so that we can be able to interrupt and slow down the transmission. So that is the concern that we have at this moment.
Just on that point, what are the possible consequences of a mutation?
So usually mutation of the virus will result in three major consequences. The first one is that it can result in increased transmissibility. That is, the virus can easily spread from person to person. So that makes it even easier for the outbreak to spread wider. The second one is in terms of the severity of the disease. So if the virus mutates and results in increased severity of the disease, that means even more people are going to die because the disease will become much more severe. The third one is in terms of the countermeasures that we have. So the diagnostics and, of course, the vaccines that are being developed now and other therapeutics. So if the virus changes significantly, it can affect the tests that are being used in the field, the ability of the tests to detect the virus, and also it can affect the vaccines that are being developed. However, we are hopeful that the current measures that are being put in place can be able to slow this virus transmission and prevent a mutation taking place on the ground.
And Dr. Otim, would a mutation, I know we're not there yet, at least from the data that you've got currently, but would a mutation increase the likelihood of Ebola spreading beyond the borders of the DRC?
Even in the current form, the virus is still able to spread beyond the DRC, and it has already shown that because we had the transmission across the border into Uganda, which has been quickly contained. So we have to continue to put the measures that we have currently in terms of identifying the cases and listing all the contacts and following them, and screening of travelers at the points of entry to ensure that any person who has been exposed does not travel and leave the country. So those measures are very, very important. So if we don't implement those, even in the current form, it can still be able to spread. And that is what we have been focusing on, ensuring that the outbreak remains contained within the areas that are affected currently in DRC. And the focus will be on that.
And is the DRC and the rest of the continent, are they all, shall we say, better prepared than they were when the first cases for this year in May were detected to try and manage or prevent a rapid spread of Ebola currently?
Yes, so we are now day 83 into this outbreak, and over the last almost 3 months, we've been working with all the countries, first with the DRC, looking at the 5 provinces that are affected, but also the neighboring provinces, to get them ready so that if there's a spillover to other provinces, they can be able to detect and quickly respond. Around the DRC, we did map 10 countries that were classified to be at high risk, and we assessed their readiness capacities. There were gaps that were identified, and over the last 3 months or 83 days, we've been working with them to address those gaps. We have had repeats of those assessments, and we have seen significant improvement in the capacities that we usually assess for a viral hemorrhagic fever. So from South Sudan to Tanzania to Ethiopia to Zambia to Kenya, there have been significant improvement in the capacities that these countries have. Are they fully ready? No, they are not 100% ready, but there has been significant progress made, and we continue to encourage the countries to invest in readiness so that the mechanism that is required to kick in immediately you have an imported case is well developed, and the countries can be able to respond with speed.
Where would you say the greatest gaps in that readiness are currently?
One of the areas that has consistently scored very low in most of the countries is the issue of infection prevention and control in the health facilities and in the communities. It's one area that has scored persistently low in most of the countries. The other one is also in terms of the capacity for investigation and contact tracing. That is an area that also requires a lot of efforts to be done. The third one is in terms of prepositioning of supplies. You know, you need to have adequate PPEs and all the requirements that you need to isolate safely and manage a case. And those are the areas that we've had scoring low in most of the countries, and we've been working with them to preposition the supplies, not only at the national level, but as low as possible in the districts that have been assessed to be at high risk.
Dr. Patrick Otim, good to talk to you, the World Health Organization's incident manager, speaking to us on Unwrap Africa about the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where more than 1,800 people are reported to have died so far. This is Unwrap Africa, much more when we return. Hello again. So Big Smuda is an American musician who says that he found a home in Africa, and he believes that this is in fact where his origins are. The music that he makes is about Ubuntu as well as reconnecting with the continent. Well, our producer Unwrap Tembu spent time with him in studio and got a taste of his brand new music.
Me coming from the United States, I'm like that poster child. It's showing people that despite the xenophobia, Afrophobia, and all that stuff that people see on the media, I'm a person that's a prime example that you can come here and pour your money into the society. At first, it wasn't a problem being called an African American because you just knew your roots was here. You just didn't know where. You need to tap into the roots. When you find the roots of everything, I'm sure you're going to find that everything started in this continent. If you don't think that people that got the same color, same hue, and they filled with melanin, if you think they're not related, then something is wrong with you. Now he's back again. Don't go much. We born with rhythm. We hear a drum, we already as babies, we know how to, you know what I'm saying? So making the music is the easy part. And what better place for the music to come from than Africa, where all the black people is at. And it's high time that the world stops stealing from Africa and Africa start taking profits. I always want to make music that everybody can relate to. And that was one of my bridge gapping songs, you know, for especially the diaspora, to show them like, hey, you know, this is home.
Unwrap Africa's Unwrap Tembu in studio with Big Smuda this week. And before we go, let's remind you of our question of the day. We asked, what should SADC leaders do about the migration problem as they go into meetings in Durban starting this coming week? Let's see what you've had to say. Dinole Dwaba says that African countries should stop withholding South Africa accountable for their own incompetence. It has to start with them being fair and making life bearable for their citizens. then an influx of illegal migrants will stop. South Africa needs to think and work towards improving life for its own citizens, and any illegality should come to an end. Job creation, Dino says, should be made available for South Africans, and that a suggestion that everyone should stay in their own countries will also work. Africa will never become one, according to Dino. Foreign countries also, she says, don't want their problems. Why should South Africa want to carry their burdens? Fochville Home and Ladies says they must stop dictating, respect the Constitution and create fair economies with the international community, because Africa is very rich but is being overused by the international communities. That's why Africa is poor while the continent is most rich. And that goes on then to talk about the issues of the interests of the African continent needing to be placed above all else. I think that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you so much for watching Unwrap Africa on this Sunday evening. The news continues on SABC News next. Bye-bye.